Hello, my name is Rich Howard, owner of Architectural Builder Supply. This video is to bring you a closer look at the Hager. The part number is BB1577, although they have a different number on here. That's probably a reference to a technical drawing or some internal number that they have. Their catalog shows this as a BB1577. It's a pretty unusual hinge. In 30 years, the two that I just sold may have doubled the amount I've ever sold. It's a pretty unusual hinge, and that's because of where this hinge is used. Anyway, let's talk about what it looks like and what it measures first, and we'll talk about what it's for. So this is a 4.5 by 3 1/4. When it comes to hinges, the height is the first dimension. Maybe not so important to know that when you are dealing with a 4.5 by 4.5, but it's important to know that this 4.5 by 3 1/4 isn't 3 1/4 by 4.5. You get my drift there, my point. The overall width, that's where the 3 1/4 comes in. This is a standard weight hinge, which means it'll measure 134 thousandths thick. Let's take a look at that. 0.136 is what that actually measures, which is okay. And you can tell it's quite narrow. But you might also tell it's got some other strange features to it. There are no countersinks here. There's no swag here at all. Why would you use such an unusual hinge? Let's talk about that now. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. You would use this hinge because it's called a slip-in hinge, is what it is. This is meant to be used in aluminum storefront installation, and generally quite old aluminum storefront, like from the 1960s is where you would see a slip-in installation. There's no swag on the hinge leaf here. Well, there is. It's a bit reverse, though. It's almost flat. It actually sticks out a little bit further than it would otherwise, so that you have what would be a swag of 5/16 of an inch. That's going to be a reference to the dimension between the hinge leaves when they're brought parallel. Why would you need that much room? Well, you would if, in your mind's eye, imagine an aluminum and glass door, aluminum storefront. Mostly glass, trim aluminum frame, glass, whatever the case might be. In the 1960s and probably in the 1950s, they didn't attach reinforcements to the door and to the jamb that you would then attach your hinge to. They would slice or create a slot in the face of the door and in the face of the frame. Just enough to be able to take this and slide it in place. And then what they would do on the rabbet of the frame and then the edge of the door, they would drill a hole and give it a small amount of countersink, and your hinge screw is going to go right into that hole. Yes, that hole is tapped. That's tapped 1224. You can certainly see the threads now. So you'll put the screw right through the edge of the door or right into the rabbet of the frame, and then it will tighten up that way. That's how it used to be done. These hinges are still made and still available, although I can tell you the quantity of manufacturers who made them in the last so many years is now a smaller number. Hager still makes them, and that's a result of the fact that there's less demand for them. And that's because those aluminum storefront from the 50s and 60s, well, there's lots of them. Here in southern Florida, maybe not exactly where we are on the west coast of Florida, but lots of places will have storefront that's that old, and you will see those slip-in hinges, in fact. And the 3 1/4 is just the right size based on what was done. That tells me that that hinge barrel is going to run right up tight to the face of the door and the face of the jamb, which is actually the way that it's done today, in the sense that aluminum storefront hinges, you know, the ubiquitous is 4.5 by 4.5. Aluminum storefront's really going to lean towards 4.5 by 4. They bring that vertical axis of pivoting in closer to where the door resides, which is a smarter design, because there's generally not a need to accommodate a greater dimension here, moving that vertical axis of pivoting out further to get out and around something, because the door is probably going to 105 degree max anyway, or 95 degree max anyway. And bringing that vertical axis of pivoting closer to the center of the thickness of the door is a smarter more efficient way for the hinge to tolerate the job that it has to do. Extremely unusual, the 3 1/4 width. I'd like to see what door this is going into. This is a BB. That means ball bearing. There are 2 bearing packets. There would be 2 when it's a standard weight thickness versus a heavyweight thickness. I don't think they'll do slip-in hinges, which is what this is. And there's 2 ways to do a slip-in hinge. You can do both leaves swagged, like this one. You can do 1 leaf swagged, and that's more common in my experience. You'll have something, probably the door, prepped for the regular full mortise butt hinge leaf, and then the frame side will require a slip-in. Okay, so if you're doing 1 leaf prepped for that slip-in and the other leaf not, we now need to know the hand in case you have to, because those bends aren't reversible, we have to know what side of the door it's going on. Not really a big deal. You could take that and flip it over and drive the pin out and stick it here if you wanted. This hinge isn't concerned over the hand of your door. It'll go on this side or it'll go on this side. It doesn't matter. This is a 1577, and all of that together means slip-in. It also means that it is a brass base material. Okay, this is a 626 finish. That means it's made of brass. It's plated satin chrome. It has a little bit of lacquer on it as well. That's what gives it its sheen. Just a protective coating. The Hager logo, USA, right below it. Not to mean that it's necessarily made in the United States. They're just saying that their logo says USA below it to differentiate the fact that this hinge may or may not be domestically manufactured. They're not making a declaration on that logo that it is, necessarily. They have a date code stamped on the back as well, which some manufacturers do. I like to see some of those date codes only because I've seen some pretty old date codes. So I'm assuming that's the date right there that this was made. Okay, this is going to include 1224 flat undercut head thread forming stainless steel machine screws. They're not going to send any wood screws. You wouldn't use a slip-in hinge with a wood application, although you can. If you've ever heard the term double mortise or double deep mortise, that means you are installing, just in your mind's eye, you're installing a wood door, and this happens, down onto a frame, and you can't mortise the frame at all. You're going to surface mount that leaf right onto the frame, and you need a slip-in because there's no swag here, and it will rest flat properly against a flat, think of a channel iron frame. There is a museum in New England, I won't name the museum, but they have this type of application where they have these channel iron frames that they've hung these beautiful wood doors on that are decades old, and a double deep mortise is how they account for that. So you can't mortise to the frame, so you surface mount this. Well, how do you get the door installed in such a way that you don't have this huge gap? It's 7/16 between the leaves. You've got basically 1/8 of an inch on this leaf, and if you mortise this leaf, you're going to have 7/16 of an inch for sure. Well, you double deep mortise the door. You make that door mortise the thickness of the leaf plus all of this swag in here, basically all of the swag, so that the margin, let's say it's 1/8 of an inch, is equal to just that leaf. So it's not a double deep mortise, you're triple deep mortising it, in fact. Not uncommon, and you can use a hinge like this. The truth of the matter is Hager will make you a hinge for doing that prep. I don't think they'll call it a 1577, but this hinge is acting as a way by which I can illustrate that other hinge type. Also, both leaves aren't always necessarily drilled and tapped. If you had that one leaf, if you had that single leaf swagged for a single leaf slip-in, you wouldn't need both leaves swagged. Both leaves drilled and tapped. One would just be countersunk. Okay, let's switch to the screen view and let's take a closer look at some supporting information. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Okay, here's the hinge that we are looking at. Speaking of looking at, let's take a look at some actual photographs that we have of this hinge down below. Here's the box. There's the hinge. You can see they've got this funny bend here. That's going to result in that 5/16. That's a standard swag for a double slip-in hinge, 5/16. That's the backside. They don't finish it like they do the front side. That's normal. Most manufacturers don't. A little close-up of the hinge grain structure itself, and then a little closer as well. There are your fasteners. Thread forming, that means it's got this funny little cut, these cuts on the tip. That's meant to clear out any paint that would be in the tapped holes of the hinge reinforcement in the frame or the door. Undercut head, that's undercut here. That flat head with an undercut allows you to get that head flush with something that's thinner, like a hinge. Okay, now down below, extended description information. Both leaves tapped, 5/16 swag. Brass hinge with a stainless pin. Why did this client order brass? Probably because it's an exterior opening, would be my guess. What's unusual, though, is that they didn't opt for a security feature on the hinge, such as a non-removable pin. You'll generally see non-removable pin go with such a hinge, because these doors typically swing out. And if your barrel is exposed to the outside, you probably want the non-removable pin option. We can supply that. It is 5-knuckle. That's part of the 1577 part number. It's a 5-knuckle hinge. And when it's a 5-knuckle hinge and a standard weight hinge, it'll have 2 bearing packets. There and there. Template. Okay, first, for use on aluminum doors and frames. Application is by inserting the hinge leaves through a slot on the door and frame. Template. Ref H-209. That's the part number that's on here. I think the bottom line is it's a variant of a BB1577, I think is what they're driving at there. Then there is a link to the product catalog. One sheet, BB1577, here it is. Aluminum slip-in hinges, and a study of this page is going to give you some information about this, that's for sure. So, plain bearing over here, ball bearing over here. Both leaves tapped. One leaf tapped. Steel, steel. Both leaves tapped, one leaf tapped. Brass, brass. That's how that breaks down. Then, of course, you've got your sizes. They don't list a 4.5 by 3.25, but they do make it. Hager, one thing about Hager is, and I will be honest and say I've not always been a fan of Hager. My family's been selling Hager since the 1970s. That's a true statement. There is a reference to the 4.5 by 3.5, however. The Hager rep in the early 90s we were such close friends. He was at my wedding, and I bumped into him a couple of years ago. He's a very dear gentleman. Taught me a lot about the hardware industry as well. Just a quick fact. There's reps. Manufacturers have reps, obviously. Outside reps. There are some that really are poor. There are some that are pretty good, and then there are some that know what the heck they're doing. I got called out to a job site. They said that my doors were wrong. My doors were no good. My doors and frames, nothing was square. And it was my first time going to a job. It was a big hotel, the Hyatt Regency O'Hare in Chicago. I wouldn't say it's an iconic building, but if you're from Chicago, you definitely know what it looks like when someone says that. It's a unique round design. And that's where these doors were going, back of house, early 90s. And it was my first time basically getting thrown into the fire. And I asked this rep to meet me there, the Hager rep, and he did. And allow me to tell you this. It took us longer to walk to the door than it took us to resolve the problem. He spotted it immediately what the problem was. He saw it instantaneously. I didn't. What happened was this project, actually what he said was, and I haven't thought of this job in a long time, obviously. What he said was the swing clear hinges, maybe that's not what it was. The swing clear hinges were defective. A swing clear hinge is an unusual animal in that roughly looks like this. Okay? That moves the pivot point from here out to here. Well, the guy said the doors weren't closing. Well, what they did was they had installed those hinges so that there was so much conflict between the trim that was already there that the hinge was actually sitting like this. And that Hager rep, let me tell you, he caught it immediately. And he said, Rich, we're out of here. We're gone. We're done. We don't need to be here, he said. Really great to have an exceptional rep. Anyway, that rabbit hole that I went down, I haven't always been a fan of Hager, I was saying, but what is true of Hager is their willingness to make a hinge. And there are other people who will tell you no. For instance, how many people will make a raised barrel spring hinge? I'll give you one guess. Hager will. Many other people will not. There are times when you need a raised barrel spring hinge. It's not often, but I just had a client who has his door, he has his frame, and when they installed the casing, they ran it right up to the edge. There's nowhere for him to put the barrel of his spring hinge, and he has to have a spring hinge because it's a fire door. Normally, what do? You set your casing back. That's normal. There's a reveal there. These guys didn't. They ran it all the way up tight. Well, Hager, they'll make us a raised barrel spring hinge, which moves that barrel off like this. Pretty cool. Hager will do that. Okay, now we've exhausted the information down below here. There's a link here to the manufacturer's page, and when we click on that, we're going to wait for that to fire up. While that's coming up, I would also want to tell you that there are lots of variants of hinges. Full mortise, half surface, full surface, and then derivatives of all of these hinges. Swing clear, wide throw. Variations of those hinges, raised barrel, based on the application, the 4 primary applications: full surface, full mortise, half surface, half mortise. That link below this video to the manufacturer's page will allow you to review not only all of the Hager products that we sell, but also a link to the manufacturer's website, as well as a link to the full product catalog. That full product catalog is going to be just positively full of all things Hager related. But really, if you're an old timer, you know him as Hager Hinge. There was once upon a time that Hager didn't sell all the things they sell now. There was a time when Hager didn't make door closers and exit devices. But the advantage of Hager that a lot of distributors like, and I think a lot of end users like as well, is that, well, I know from an advantage, speaking from a distributor's perspective, you can order from them many different product groups. Continuous geared hinges, trim and auxiliary, hinges, exit device trim or lock sets, whatever that's supposed to be, probably both. Door closers, gasketing, residential hinges, residential hardware, bypass, bifold, pocket, sliding, automatic operators, exit devices. You can get all of these product categories from them on a single PO. And that makes them pretty unique, where a single PO will get you all of that material. Let's wrap up this video on camera. If you are enjoying this video, please click thumbs up or like, and also please consider subscribing to our channel. Let's move on to the rest of the video. Another neat thing about Hager is that they have their own keying system. Hager has their own keyway. It's a small multiplex system, H1, H2, and H3. H1 is the common keyway. H1 is neat because it's both a tip-stopped and a shoulder-stopped product, which means you pin it up like small format, but it can also run into standard locks as well. And without getting too deep into the weeds on locksmithing principles, there can be an application in, let's just say, a school, where you can have all the interior door locks with conventional cylinders. So if the school district's locksmith needed to change that cylinder, it would involve removing the trim, pulling the cylinder out, repinning it, putting it back. Interchangeable core allows you via a special key called the control key, allows you within 3 seconds to remove that core and put in a new one. The Hager system allows you to have both conventional and interchangeable core products, meaning if you need to have immediate control, instantaneous control over the rights and privileges on a lock on a door, you can have that with removable core, with interchangeable core. Hager can do that. There might be other projects that it doesn't really matter, other doors that I don't need to have that core right out. But if you have an application, perhaps a school, and you need to change the keying on a door right now, it could be human resources, it could be payroll, it could be a sensitive area, it could be a hospital in the narcotics room on the 3rd floor of the hospital where all the pharmaceuticals are kept. You need to change that now. You can't be standing at the opening repinning a lock. The Hager keying system will allow you the flexibility to have that interchangeable core, immediate access over rights and privileges, and then just conventional stuff as well. So it's a pretty neat thing. If you're going to dive into the Hager keying system, on that manufacturer's page, there's the manual, and then there's a probably far too long-winded video of me discussing it. Any questions on the BB1577 slip-in hinge or any other Hager product, please feel free to reach out to us. And thank you. Again, thank you for watching, and if you've enjoyed this video, please click thumbs up. Please subscribe and maybe even send the video to someone that you know. Thank you.